With reference to energy flow, let us look into some more details. We have seen that solar energy is trapped by producers and from producers to consumers, from both producers and consumers to decomposers. Energy is lost, it does not come back to the ecosystem. So this results, particularly the transfer of energy from producers to consumers, results in the formation of what are known as feeding levels in the ecosystem or trophic levels in the ecosystem. Feeding levels or trophic levels in the ecosystem. The first feeding level, the first trophic level is always the producer. A green plant or an alga, or it may be the autotrophic bacteria. Producers represent the first trophic level. This plant may become the food for an animal, a consumer. So a consumer which directly obtains its food by feeding on a producer, is called a primary consumer. So a primary consumer represents second trophic level in an ecosystem. There is a plant, it is functioning in the ecosystem as a producer. There is a herbivorous animal which feeds on this plant to get its food energy, and this herbivorous animal represents the primary consumer. This primary consumer may become the food for another consumer, a consumer which feeds on the primary consumer. It is known as secondary consumer. A secondary consumer will be a carnivorous animal feeding on this herbivorous animal. It represents trophic level three. This secondary consumer may become the food for another animal, another consumer, which is known as tertiary consumer. consumer. A tertiary consumer will be another carnivorous animal. This carnivorous animal gets its food by feeding on the previous carnivorous animal, the previous level, which in turn has fed on the primary consumer, the herbivorous animal, which in turn has fed on the producer. So tertiary consumer represents trophic level 4. Trophic level 4. So a green plant can be a producer, a herbivorous animal can be a primary consumer, a carnivore of the first order which feeds only on primary consumer can be a secondary consumer, a carnivore of the second order which feeds on another carnivore can be a tertiary consumer. So this will be, for example, it may be a herbivore, primary consumer may be a herbivore, secondary consumer may be a carnivore of the first order feeding on herbivore, tertiary consumer may be a carnivore of the second order feeding on the carnivore of the first order. Let us take a few familiar examples. In a given place, let us say there is a patch of grass growing. To feed on this grass, there are insects called grasshoppers. Grasshoppers, grass manufactures its food using solar energy. Grasshoppers obtain their food energy by feeding on grass. These grasshoppers are consumed as food by animals such as frogs. So frogs obtain their food energy from grasshoppers, and these frogs may become the food for snakes. So snakes become the tertiary consumer. Grass producer, grasshoppers primary consumer, frogs secondary consumer, snakes tertiary consumer. Take another example. Take another example. There are numerous algae growing in a pond. Algae represent producers. These algae become the food for the larvae of a variety of insects. In most of the terrestrial insects lay their eggs in water, which hatch out into larvae. The best, most familiar example is the mosquito. So insect larvae feed on these algae. Insect larvae become the food for fishes, and these fishes become the food for birds. So here algae are the producers, trophic level 1, Insect larvae are primary consumers, trophic level 2. Fishes are secondary consumers, trophic level 3. Birds are tertiary consumers, trophic level 4. So this is a situation in a terrestrial ecosystem. This is a situation in an aquatic ecosystem. One more example let us take. There is a tree. Depending on the tree for food, there are variety of birds. On the body of these birds, on the feathers of these birds, there are tiny insects depending on the birds for their food. The bird lice. Inside the body of these bird lice, there are parasites, tiny parasites, protozoans, depending on bird lice for their food. So tree is the producer, birds are the primary consumers, bird lice are the secondary consumers, protozoans are the tertiary consumers. Protozoans obtain food from bird lice obtain food from birds obtain food from tree manufactures its food using solar energy. So we have taken three different situations. One is a situation in a terrestrial ecosystem, the other a situation in an aquatic ecosystem, and the third one is a situation involving parasites. Birds parasitic on the tree, bird lice parasitic on the birds, protozoans parasitic inside the body of bird lice. So this is the situation with reference to energy flow in the ecosystem. When you look at these examples, you will see a very interesting situation in the ecosystem. Let us take the first example. Grass. What is the situation with reference to size? Let us first examine with reference to size. Grass smaller than grasshoppers. So grasshoppers are larger in size compared to grass. Grasshoppers are smaller in size compared to frogs. Frogs are smaller in size compared to snakes. So in the first example, what is the situation? Size of the organisms at the successive trophic levels is increasing. Grass, grasshoppers, frogs, snakes. Look at the second example. Algae, minute, microscopic, size is very small. Insect larvae, larger in size than algae. Fishes, larger in size than insect larvae. Birds, larger in size than fishes. So in the first two examples, you can see the size is increasing. Let us say what is happening to the number of grass found in a given area will be always more than the number of grasshoppers found in that geographical area. So number of grasshoppers will be less than the number of grass. Number of frogs depending on these grasshoppers for food will be less than the number of grasshoppers. Number of snakes depending on the frogs will be less than the number of frogs. So number of grass maximum, number of grasshoppers decreasing, frogs still less, snakes still less. Algae numerous, minute, microscopic, numerous. Insect larvae less in number, fishes still less in number, birds still less in number. So in the first two examples you see a situation where from one trophic level to the next trophic level, from one trophic level to the next trophic level, size of the organisms is increasing, but the number of organisms is decreasing. Size is increasing, number is decreasing. Look at the third example. Look at the third example. See what is happening in this example. There is one tree, huge in size. Depending on the tree for food, there may be some 100 birds. Size is small. Size of the bird lice living as parasites on the feathers of birds still less. Size of the protozoans found inside the body of bird lice still less. So what is happening here? Size is gradually decreasing from one trophic level to another trophic level. But what is happening to number? There is one tree. Imagine it may have 100 birds. Each of these birds may contain 100 lice on its feathers. In each of these bird louse, there may be hundreds of protozoans inside as parasites. So number is increasing from one trophic level to another trophic level because size is decreasing from one trophic level to another trophic level. So we can draw a generalization in the successive trophic levels. In the successive trophic levels, as the size of the participating organisms increases, number of organisms at the successive trophic level, number of organisms at the successive trophic level decreases. As the size increases, number of organisms decreases, and as the size decreases, the number of organisms at the successive trophic levels increases. As the size increases, the number decreases. As the size decreases, the number increases. What is the reason? The reason for this is the amount of energy available for each trophic level decreases successively. Amount of food energy, for example, in the grass is maximum. Amount of food energy available for grasshoppers is much less. Amount of food energy available for frogs is still less. Amount of food energy available for snakes will be still less. Same thing in the other examples. This is how ecosystem is able to maintain its equilibrium as far as energy flow is concerned. Since the amount of energy keeps decreasing at the successive trophic levels in an ecosystem, there cannot be usually more than 4 trophic levels. 3 is ideal, 4 is okay, fifth one in most cases will not be possible. It may happen, for example, the snake may become food for an eagle. Then we call it as quaternary consumer. It becomes trophic level 5. But quaternary consumer, trophic level 5, gets the least amount of food energy. Therefore, the ideal situation in an ecosystem is to have 3 or 4 trophic levels, because the amount of energy keeps decreasing from one trophic level to another trophic level. In nature we call this idea as 10% law. 10% law. Out of the total amount of energy available at trophic level 1, only 10% can get transferred to the next trophic level. If the 10% becomes 100 here, out of that only 10% can get into the secondary consumer. Out of that only 10% can be transferred to the next trophic level. This idea in nature is known as the 10% law.